Word of Mouth is an adult story time presented by the Juliet Hampton Morgan Memorial Library. News stories are posted every month on the second Sunday at 2:30 p.m. If you enjoyed today's program, please consider liking and subscribing to our YouTube page or following our Facebook. As a reminder, some stories contain adult language and content. It is recommended you review stories before allowing younger audiences to listen.
Hello, my name is Patrick Hutzler, and I'll be reading great short works by Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven, several poems, and the story The Pit and the Pendulum. Thank you. Now let us begin. We will now be reading our first story, The Raven, by Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. Distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished for the morrow, vainly I sought to borrow from my book's surcease of sorrow for the lost Lenore. For the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore, and the silken sad uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now to still the beating of my heart I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating at my chamber door. 'Tis some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door." This and nothing more. Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," I said, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarcely was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token. And the only word there was the whispered word, "Lenore." Merely this and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," I said, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see what there is at this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment and the mystery explore. 'Tis the wind and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not in the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady perched above my chamber door. Perched upon my bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. Perched and sat and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, but the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, grim and ghastly an ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though it answered little meaning, little relevance bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet blessed with seeing birds above this chamber door. Bird or beast upon this sculpted bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven sitting lonely on the placid bust spoke only that one word, Of his soul in that one word he did outpour, nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, I said. What it utters is it only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster till his song one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope and melancholy burden bore of never, nevermore. But the raven still beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking that this ominous bird of yore, when his grim, ungainly, ghastly gone, an ominous bird of yore, meant in croaking, nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllables expressing. To the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom core, this and more I sat diving, my head at ease reclining, on the cushion's velvet lining that lamplight gloated over, whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating over, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretched, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels hath he sent thee. Respite, and a fifth from my emotions of Lenore. Quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this loss never, Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed, be here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by the heavens that bent us above us, by the God we both adore, tell the soul with sorrow laden, if within this distant Aden it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels named Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, who the angels named Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word or sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, starting. Get thee back into the tempest of the night Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as token of thy lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thee beak out from my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting, on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of the demon's that is dreaming. And the lamplight over him streaming through his shadows on the floor, and my soul from that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. The Pit and the Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe. Impiti torum langas hic turba furas sanguinis inoquae non satina alut. Sophiat nunca patria faco nunc veneris antro, or ubi dira fuit vita felisque patent. Quarantine composed of the gates of a market, to be erected upon the site of Jacob of the Jacobin Club House of Paris. I was sick, sick unto death with that long agony. And when they at length unbound me and I was permitted to sit, I felt that my senses were leaving me. The sentence, the dread sentence of death, was the last of distinct accentations which reached my ears. After that, the sound of the inquisitorial voices seemed merged in one dreamy, indeterminate hum. It conveyed to my soul the idea of revolution, perhaps from its association in fancy with the burr of a mill wheel. This only for a brief period, for presently I heard no more, and yet for a while I saw. But how terrible an exaggeration I saw the lips of the black-robed judge. They appeared to me white, whiter than the sheets upon which I traced these words, and thin even to grotesqueness, thin with the intensity of their expression of firmness, of immovable resolution, of stern contempt of human torture. I saw the decree of what he was to me, fate, were still issuing from the lips. I saw them writhe with a deadly locution. I saw them fashion the syllables of my name, and I shuddered because no sound succeeded. I saw, too, for a few moments of delirious horror, the soft and nearly imperceptible waving of the stable draperies, which enwrapped the walls of the apartment. And then my vision fell upon the 7 tall candles upon the table. At first they wrote the aspect of charity, and seemed white, slender angels who would save me. But then all at once came a most deadly nausea over my spirit, and I felt every fiber in my frame thrill as if I touched the wire of the galvanic battery, while the angels' form became meaningless specters with heads aflame. I saw that from them there would be no help. And then there stole to my fancy like a rich musical note the thought of what sweet rest there must be in the grave. The thought came gently and stealthily. It seemed long before it attained full appreciation, but just as my spirits came at length properly to feel and entertain it, the figure of the judge vanished as if magically. From before me the tall candles sank into nothingness. Their flames went out utterly. The blackness of darkness supervened. All sensations appeared swallowed up in a mad, rushing descent of the souls into Hades. Then silence and stillness and the night were the universe. I had swooned, but still not say that all consciousness was lost. What if there remained, I will not attempt to define, or even to describe, yet was not lost. In the deepest slumber, no. In delirium, no. In the swoon, no. In the death, no. Even in the grave, all is not lost. Else there is no immortality for man. Arousing from the most profound of slumbers, we break the gossamer web of some dream. Yet in a second afterward, so frail may the web have been, we remember that not that we have dreamed. In the return to life from the swoon, there are 2 stages. First, that of the sense of mental or spiritual. Secondly, that of the sense of physical existence. It seems probable that if upon reaching the second stage, we could recall the impression of the first, we should find these impressions eloquent in memory of the gulf beyond. And that gulf is what? How at least shall we distinguish its shadows from those of the tomb? But if the impression of what I have termed the first stage are not at will recalled, yet after long intervals they do not come unbidden. While we marvel whence they came, he who has swooned is not he who finds strange places and wildly familiar faces, and coals that glow. Is not he who beholds, floating in mid-air, the sad vision of the many may not viewed? Is not he who ponders ever the perfume of some novel flower? Is not he whose brain bewildered with the remainings of some musical candescence, which had never been before attested in his attention? Amid frequent and thoughtful endeavors to remember, amidst the struggles to regather some token of the state of the seeming nothingness into which my soul has lapsed, there have been moments when I have dreamed of success. There have been brief, very brief periods when I have conjured up the remnants of the lucid reason of the latter epoch. Assures me could have the reference only to that condition, a seeming unconsciousness. These shadows of memory tell indistinctly of tall figures that lifted and bore me in silence down, down, still down, till a hideous dizziness oppressed me at the mere idea of interminableness of the descent. They tell also of the vague horror at my heart on account of that heart unnatural stillness. When then comes a sense of sudden motion, stillness throughout all things, as if those who bore me, a ghastly train, had outrun in their descent the limits of the limitless, and paused from the weariness of their toil. After this I call into mind flatness and dampness, and then all is madness, madness of a memory which busies itself among forbidden things. Very suddenly there came back into my soul motion, and sound, and tumultuous motion of the heart, and in my ears the sound of its beating, then a pause in which all is blank. That sound and motion and touch, a tingling sensation pervading my frame. Then the mere consciousness of existence, without thought, a condition, which lasted long, and then, very suddenly, thought and sudden terror, an earnest endeavor to comprehend my true state, then a strong desire to lapse into insensibility, then a rushing revival of my soul, and a successful effort to move, and now a full memory of the trial, of the judge, of the stable draperies of the sentence, of the sickness of the swoon, then the entire forgetfulness of all that followed, of all that later day, and much earnestness of endeavor have enabled me vaguely to recall. So far I have not opened my eyes. I felt that I lay upon my back unbound. I reached out my hand, and it fell heavily upon something damp and hard. There I suffered it to remain for many minutes, while I strove to imagine where and what I could be. I longed, yet dared not to employ my vision. I dreaded the first glance at objects around me. It was not that I feared to look upon things horrible, but that I grew aghast lest there should be nothing to see. At length, with a wild desperation at heart, I quickly closed my eyes. My worst thoughts, then, were confirmed. The blackness of eternal night encompassed me. I struggled for breath. The intensity of the darkness seemed to oppress and stifle me. The atmosphere was intolerably close. I still lay quietly and made efforts to exercise my reason. I brought to mind the inquisitorial proceedings, and the attempt from that point to deduce my real condition. The sentence had passed, and it appeared to me that a very long interval of time had since elapsed. Yet not for a moment did I suppose myself actually dead. Such a supposition, notwithstanding that we read in fiction, is altogether inconsistent with real existence. But where and in what state was I? The condemned to death? I knew perish usually at the autodafis, and one of these had been held on that very night of the day of my trial. Had I been remanded to my dungeon to await the next sacrifice, which would not take place for many months? This I at once saw could not be. Victims have been in immediate demand. Moreover, my dungeon, as well as digging themselves of Toledo, had stone floors, and light was not altogether excluded. A fearful idea now suddenly drove my blood to torrents upon my heart, and for a brief period I once more relapsed into insensibility. Upon recovering, I at once started to my feet, trembling, convulsing every fiber. I thrust my arms wildly above and around me in all directions. I felt nothing, yet dreaded to move a step, lest I should be impeded by a wall of a tomb. Perspiration burst from my every pore, and stood in a cold, big beads upon my forehead. The agony of suspense grew at length intolerable, and I cautiously moved forward, with my arms extended and my eyes straining from their sockets, in the hopes of catching some faint ray of light. I proceeded for many paces, but still all was blackness and vacancy. I breathed more freely. It seemed evident that mine was not at least the more hideous of fates. And now I was still continued to step cautiously onward. There came thronging upon my recollection a thousand vague rumors of the horror of Toledo, of the dungeon that had been strange things narrated. Fables I had always deemed them, but yet strange and too ghastly to repeat, save in whisper. Was I left to perish of starvation in the subterranean world of darkness? Or what fate, perhaps even more fearful, awaited me? That the results would be death, and a death of more than a customary bitterness, I knew too well that the character of my judge to doubt. The mode and the hour were all that occupied and distracted me. My outstretched hand at the length encountered some solid obstruction. There was a small, seemingly stone masonry, very smooth, slimy, and cold. I followed it up, stepping with all careful distrust, which certain antique narratives had inspired me. This process, however, afforded me no means to ascertain the dimensions of my dungeon, that I might make its circuit and return to the point where I set out without being aware of the fact. So perfectly uniform seemed the walls, I thereupon sought the knife which had been in my pocket when led into the inquisitional chamber, but it was gone. My clothes had been exchanged for a wrapper of coarse serge. I had thought of forcing the blade in some minute crevice of the masonry so as to identify my point of departure. The difficulty, nevertheless, was but trivial. Although in the disorder of my fancy it seemed at first insuperable, I tore a part of the hem of my robes and placed the fragment at full length at a right angle to the wall. In the groping my way around the prison, I could not fail to encounter this rag upon completing the circuit. So at least I thought, but I had not counted upon the extent of the dungeon, or upon my own weakness. The ground was moist and slippery. I staggered onward for some time. Then I stumbled and fell. My excessive fatigue induced upon me to remain prostrate, and sleep soon overtook me as I lay. Upon awaking and stretching forth an arm, I found beside me a loaf and a pitcher with water. I was too exhausted to reflect upon the circumstance, but ate and drank with avidity. Shortly afterwards I resumed my tour around the prison, and with much toil came at last upon the fragment of the serge. Up to the period when I fell, I had counted 52 paces, and upon resuming my walk, I had counted 48 more. Then I arrived at the rag. There were in all then 100 paces, and omitting 2 paces to a yard, I presumed the dungeon to be 50 yards in a circuit. I had met, however, with many angles in the wall and thrust. I could not form no guess at the shape of the vault, for the vault I could not help supposing it to be. I had little object certainty, no hope in these researches, but a vague curiosity prompted me to continue them. Quitting the wall, I resolved to cross the area of the enclosure. At first, I proceeded with extreme caution, for the floor, although seemingly solid, was treacherous with slime. At length, however, I took courage and did not hesitate to step firmly, endeavoring to cross in a direct line, as opposed to the advance some 10 to 12 paces in this manner. When the remnant of the torn hem of my rope became entangled between my legs, I stepped on it and fell violently on my face. In the confusion attending my fall, I did not immediately apprehend a somewhat startling circumstance, which yet in a few seconds afterwards, and while I still lay prostrate, arrested my attention. It was this: my chin rested upon the floor of the prison, my lip and the upper portion of my head, seemingly less elevated than the chin, touched nothing. At the same time, my forehead seemed bathed in a clammy vapor, and a peculiar smell of decay and fungus arose to my nostrils. I put forward an arm and shuddered to find that I had fallen to the very brink of a circular pit, whose extent I had no means to ascertain. At the moment groping about the masonry just below the margin, I succeeded in dislodging a small fragment and let it fall into the abyss. For many seconds I hearkened to its reverberation as it dashed against the side of the chasm in its ascent. At length there was a sudden plunge into water, preceded by loud echoes. At the same moment there came the sound resembling the quick opening as a rapid closing of the door overhead, while a faint gleam of light flashed suddenly through the room, and it suddenly faded away. I saw clearly the doom which had been prepared for me, and congratulated myself upon the timely accident by which I had escaped. Another step before my fall, and the world would have seen me no more. The death just avoided was that of the very character which I had regarded as fabulous and frivolous in the tales respecting the Inquisition. To the victims of its tyranny there was the choice of death with its most duress physical agonies, or death with the most hideous moral horrors. I had been reserved for the latter, but long suffering my nerves had been unstrung, until I trembled into the sound of my own voice, and become in every respect a fitting subject for the species of torture which awaited me. Shaking in every limb which I groped my way back to the wall, resolving there to perish rather than risk the terrors of the well, of which my imagination now pictured many in various positions around the dungeon, and other conditions of mind. I might have had courage to end my misery at once, be plunged into one of these abysses. But now I was on the vestige of cowardice. Neither could I forget what I had read of these pits, that the sudden extinction of life formed no part of their most horrible plan. Agitation of spirit kept me awake for many long hours, but at length I again slumbered upon arousing. I found by my side, as before, a loaf and a pitcher of water. A burning thirst consumed me as I emptied the vessel. At a draught, it must have been drugged, for scarcely had I drunk before I became irresistibly drowsy. A deep sleep fell before me, a sleep like that of death. How long it lasted, of course, I know not. But then, once again, I unclosed my eyes. The objects around me were visible. By a wild sulphurous luster, the origin of which I could not find at first determine, I was enabled to see the extent and aspect of the prison. In its size I had been greatly mistaken, for the whole circuit of this wall did not exceed 25 yards. For some minutes this fact occasioned me a world of vain trouble. Vain indeed, for what could be less important under the terrible circumstances which invaded me than the mere dimensions of my dungeon? My soul took a wild interest in trifles, as I busied myself in endeavors to account for the error I had committed in my measurements. The truth at length flashed upon me. In my first attempt at exploration, I counted 52 paces to the period when I fell. Then I must have been within a pace or two of the fragment of the surge. In fact, I had nearly performed the circle of the vault. Then I then slipped, and upon my awakening, I must have returned upon my steps, thus supposing my circuit nearly double what it actually was. My confusion of mind prevented me from observing that I began with my tour of the wall to the left, and ended it with the wall to the right. I had been deceived, too, in respect to the shape of the enclosure, and feeling my way, I found many angles, and thus deduced the idea of great irregularity, so potent is the effect of total darkness upon one arousing from lethargy or sleep. The angles were simply those of a few slight depressions or niches at odd intervals, and the general shape of the prison was square. What I had taken for masonry seemed now to be iron, or some other metal in huge plates. Those structures or joints occasioned the depressions. The entire surface of this metallic enclosure was broadly dabbled in all the hideous and repulsive devices in which the charnel superstition of the monks had given rise. The figures of fiends and aspects of menace, with skeletal forms and other more really fearful images overspread and disfigured the wall. I observed that the outlines of these monstrosities were sufficiently distinct, but the colors seemed faded and blurred, as if more the effects of a damp atmosphere. I had now noticed the floor, too, which was of stone. In the center yawned a circular pit, from whose jaws I had escaped, but it was only one in the dungeon. All this I saw indistinctly, and by much effort. My personal condition had been greatly changed during my slumber. I now lay upon my back and at full length on a species of low framework of wood. This I had securely bound by a long strap resembling circingles. It passed in many convolutions about my limbs and body, leaving at liberty only my head and left arm, to such extent that I could, by dint of much exploration, supply myself with food from the earthen dish which lay by my side on the floor. I saw to my heart the picture that had been removed. I say to my heart, for I was consumed with intolerable thirst. This thirst it appeared to be designed of my persecutors to stimulate, for the food in the dish was meat pungently seasoned. Looking upward, I surveyed the ceiling of my prison. It was some 30 or 40 feet overhead, and constructed much as the side walls in one of its panels a very singular figure riveted my whole attention. It was the painted figure of Time, as he is commonly represented, save that in lieu of a scythe, he held with a casual glance supposed to be a pictured image of a huge pendulum, such as we see on antique clocks. There was something, however, in the appearance of this machine which caused me to regard it more attentively, which, while I gazed directly upward at it, for its position was immediately over my own, I fancied that I saw it in motion. In an instant afterwards, the fancy confirmed its sleep was brief and, of course, slow. I watched it for some minutes, somewhat in fear, but more in wonder. I wearied at length with observing its dull movements. I turned my eyes upon the other objects in the cell. A slight noise attracted my notice, and looking at the floor, I saw several enormous rats traversing it. They had issued from the well, which lay just within view of my right. Even then, while I gazed, they came up to troops hurriedly, with ravenous eyes allured by the scent of the meat. For this, it required much effort and attention to scare them away. It might have been half an hour, perhaps even an hour, for I could take but imperfect note of time before I again cast my eyes upward. What I then saw confounded and amazed me. The sweep of the pendulum had increased in extent by nearly a yard. The natural consequence, its velocity was also much greater. But what mainly disturbed me was how the idea of it had perceivably descended. I now observed with the horror it knew to state that its neither extremity was formed of a crescent of glittering steel about a foot in length from horn to horn, the horn's upward under edge evidently as keen as that of a razor. Like a razor, it seems massy and heavy, tapering from edge into solid and broad structures above. It apprehended to a weighty rod of brass, and the whole hissed as it swung through the air. I could no longer doubt the doom prepared for me by the monkish ingenuity in torture. My cognizance of the pit had become known to the Inquisition agents. The pit, whose heart had been destined for so bold a recusant as myself. The pit, typical of hell, regarded by rumors as the ultima thule of all their punishments. The plunge into the pit I had avoided by the merest of accidents, and I knew that surprise and entrapment into torment formed an important portion of all the grotesqueries of these dungeons' depths. Having failed to follow it, it was no part of the demon's plans to hurl me into the abyss, and thus, there being no alternative, a different and a milder destruction awaited me. Milder. I half smiled at my agony, as I thought of the implications of such a term. What boots it to tell of the long, long hours of horror more than the mortal during which I counted the rushing vibrations of steel, inch by inch, line by line, with an ascent only appreciable at intervals that seemed ages down. And still down it came. Days passed. It might have been many days ere it swept so closely over me as to fan me with its acritic breath. The odor of the sharp steel forced itself into my nostrils. I prayed, I wearied heaven with my prayers for its more speedy descent. I grew fanatically mad and struggled to force myself upwards against the sweep of the fearful scimitar. And then I felt suddenly calm and lay smiling at the glittering death, as a child at some rare bauble. There was another interval of utter insensibility. It was brief, for upon again lapsing into life, there had been no perceptible descent into the pendulum. But it might have been long, for I knew there were demons who took note of my swoon, and could have arrested the vibration at pleasure. Upon my recovery, too, I felt very, inexpressibly sick and weak, as if the long inanition, even amid the agonies of that period, the human nature craved food. With painful effort, I outstretched my left arm as far as my bonds permitted, and took possession of the small room which had been spared to me by the rats. They pulled a portion formed through thoughts of joy, of hope, and yet what business had I with hope? It was, as I say, half-formed thoughts. Man has many such which are never completed. I felt that it was of joy, of hope, but I felt also that it had perished in its formation. In vain I struggled to perfect, to retain it. Long suffering had nearly annihilated all my ordinary powers of mind. I was an imbecile, an idiot. The vibration of the pendulums was at a right angles to my length. I saw that the crescent was designed to cross the region of my heart. I would fray the serge of my robe. It would return and repeat its operation again and again, notwithstanding its terrifically wide sweep, some 30 feet or more, and hissing vigor of its descent sufficient to sunder the very walls of iron. Still, the fraying of my rope will be all that For several minutes it would accomplish, and this thought I paused. I dared not to go further than this reflection. I dwelt upon it with a pertinacity of attention, as if in so dwelling I could arrest hereupon the descent of the steel. I forced myself to ponder upon the sound of the crescent, as it should pass across the garment, upon the particular thrilling sensation which the friction of cloth produces on the nerves. I pondered all this frivolity until my teeth were on edge. Down, steadily down it crept. I took a frenzied pleasure in contrasting its downward with its lateral velocity. To the right, to the left, far and wide, with the shriek of a damned spirit. To my heart, with all the stealthy pace of the tiger, I alternately laughed and howled as one or the other idea grew predominant. Down, certainly, relentlessly down, it vibrated within 3 inches of my bosom. I struggled violently, furiously to free my left arm. This was free only from the elbow to the hand. I could reach the ladder from the platters beside me to my mouth with great effort, but no farther could I have broken the fastenings above my elbow. I would have seized and attempted to arrest the pendulum. I might have as well as attempted to arrest an avalanche. Down, still unceasingly, still inevitably, down, I grasped and struggled. At each vibration, I shrunk compulsively as it ever swept. My eyes followed it outward or upward, whirled with the eagerness of the most unmeaning despair. They closed themselves spasmodically. At the descent, although death would have been a relief, oh, how unspeakable! Still I quivered in every nerve to think how slight a sinking of the machinery would appreciate that keen, glistening axe over my bosom. It was hope that prompted the nerve to quiver, the frame to shrink. It was hope, the hope that triumphs on the rack, that whispers to death, condemned even in the dungeon of the Inquisition. I saw that some 10 or 12 vibrations would bring the steel in actual contact with my robe. With observation there suddenly came over my spirit all the keen collectedness of the despair. For the first time during many hours, or perhaps days, I thought. It was now occurred to me that the bandage or syringical which enveloped me was unique. I was tied by no separate cord. The first stroke of the razor-like crescent thwarted any position of the band. It would be so detached that it might be unwound from my person by means of my left hand. But how fearful in that case the proximity of the steel. The result of the slightest struggle, how deadly. It is likely, moreover, that the minions of the torturers had not foreseen and provided for this possibility. Was it probable that the bandage had crossed my bosom in the tracks of the pendulum? Dreading to find my fate, and it seems my last hope, I so far elevated my head as to obtain a distinct view of my breast. The syringical enveloped my limbs and body close in all directions, save in the path of the destroying crescent. Scarcely I had dropped my head back into its original position. And then, when there flashed upon my mind what I cannot describe as the unformed half of the idea of deliverance, to which I had previously alluded, and of which a moiety only floated intermittently through my brain. When I raised my food to my burning lips, the whole thought was now present, feeble, scarcely sane, scarcely definite, but still entire. I proceeded at once with the nervous energy of despair to attempt its execution. For many hours, the immediate vicinity of the low framework, in which I had been literally swarming with rats. They were wild, bold, ravenous, their red eyes glaring upon me as if waiting but but motionless on my part, to make me their prey. To what food, I thought, had they been accustomed to in the well? They had devoured in spite of all my efforts to prevent them, all but a small remnant of the contents of the dish. I had fallen into the habitual seesaw or wave of the hand about the platter, and at length unconsciously uniformity of the movement deprived it of effect. In their voracity the vermin frequently fastened their sharp fangs in my fingers. With the particles of the oily and spicy vinaigrette which now remained, thoroughly rubbed the bandage wherever I could reach. Then, raising my head from the floor, I lay breathlessly still. At first the ravenous animals were startled and terrified at the change, but the sensation of motion, they shrank for a moment. I had not counted in vain upon their voracity. Observing that I remained without motion, one or two of the boldest leaped upon the framework and smelt at the surgicals. This seemed the signal, for the general rushed forth from the well. They hurried in fresh troops. They clung to the wood. They overran it and leapt in, hundreds upon my person. The measured movements of his pendulum disturbed them not at all. Avoiding its stroke, they busied themselves with the anointed bandage. They pressed, they swarmed upon me in accumulating heaps. They writhed upon my throat, their cold lips my own. I was half stifled by their throng, pressing disgust of which the world has no name swelled at my bosom, and chilled with a very clamminess. My heart yet 1 minute, and I felt the struggle would be over. Plainly I perceived the loosening of the bandage. I knew that in more than one place it was still already severed. With a more than human resolution, I lay still. Nor had I erred in my calculations, nor had I endured in vain. I at length felt that I was free. The syringical hung in ribbons from my body, but the stroke of the pendulum had already pressed upon my bosom. I dived the serge of my robe. It had cut through the linen beneath. Twice again it swung, and a sharp sense of pain shot through every nerve. But the moment of the escape had arrived. At a wave of my hands, and my deliverer hurried tumultuously away. With a steady movement and cautious sidelong shrinking and slow, I slid from the embrace of the bandages, and beyond the reach of the scimitar. For the moment at least, I was free. Free, and the gasp of the Inquisition. I scarcely stepped from my wooden bed of horror, and upon the stone floor of the prison, and the motion of the hellish machine ceased, and I beheld it drawn upon by some visible force through the ceiling. This was the lesson which I took desperately to heart. My every motion was undoubtedly watched. Free, I had but escaped death in one form of agony, to be delivered upon a worse than death in some other. With that thought, I rolled my eyes nervously around on the barriers of iron that hemmed me in. Something unusual, some change which, at first, I could not appreciate distinctly. It was obvious had taken place in the apartment. For many minutes of my dreamy, trembling abstraction, I busied myself in vain, unconnected conjecture. During this period, I became aware for the very first time of the origin of the sulphurous light, which illuminated the cell. It proceeded from a fissure about half an inch in width, extending entirely around the prison at the base of the wall, which thus appeared and were completely separated from the floor. I endeavored, but of course in vain, to look through the aperture. As I arose from the attempt, the mystery of the alteration in the chamber broke at once upon my understanding. I observed that although the outlines of the figures upon the walls were sufficiently distinct, yet the colors seemed blurred and indefinite. These colors had now assumed, or momentarily assuming, a startling and most intense brilliancy that gave the spectral and fiendish portraiture an aspect that might have thrilled even firmer nerves of my own. Demon's eyes, of a wild and ghastly vivacity, glared upon me in 1,000 directions, where none had been visible before, and gleaming with lurid luster of fire that I could not force my imagination to regard as unreal. Unreal. Even while I breathed, there came the nostrils that breath of vapor of heated iron. A suffocating odor pervaded the prison. A deeper glow settled each moment in the eyes that glared at my agonies. A richer tint of crimson diffused itself over the picture's horror of blood. I panted. I gasped for breath. There was no doubt of my design of my tormentors. Oh, most unrelenting. Oh, most demonic of men. I shrank from the glowing metal in the center of the cell, amid the thoughts of the fiery destruction that impended. The idea of the coolness in the well came over my soul like balm. I rushed to its deadly brink. I threw my straining vision below. The glare from the enkindled roof illuminated inmost recesses. Yet for a wild moment did my spirit refuse to comprehend the meaning of what I saw. At length it wrestled its way into my soul. It burned itself in upon my shuddering reason. Oh, for a voice to speak. Oh, horror! Oh, any horror but this! With a shriek, I rushed from the margin and buried my face in my hands, weeping bitterly. The heat rapidly increased, and once again I looked shuddering at the fit of the ague. There had been a second change in the cell, but now the change was obvious in form. As before, it was in vain that I at first endeavored to understand what was taking place. But not long before I was left in doubt. The inquisitorial vengeance had been hurried by my twofold escape, and there was to be no more dallying with the kings of terror. The room had been square. I saw that two of its iron angles were acute, consequently obtuse. The fearful difference quickly increased with a low rumbling or moaning sound. In an instant, the apartment had shifted its form to that of Longinus. The alliteration had stopped not here. I neither hoped nor desired it to stop. I could have clasped the red wall to my bosom as a garment of eternal peace. Death. I said, any death but the pit. Any death but that of the pit. Fool might I have not known that into the pit was the object of the burning iron to urge me. Could I resist its glow? Or if even that, could I withstand its pressure? And now flatterer and flatterer grew. The Longinus with a rapidness that left me in no time for contemplation. Its center, of course, with the greatest width, came over the yawning gulf. I shrank back, but the closing of the walls pressed me resistantly onward, at length for my seared and writhing body, but no longer an inch of the foothold on the firm floor of the prison. I struggled, no more but the agony of my soul vent in one loud, long, and final scream of despair. I felt that I tottered upon the brink. I had averted my eyes. There was the discordant hum of human voices, a loud blast as many trumpets. There was a harsh grating as 1,000 thunders. The fiery walls rushed back. An outstretched arm caught my own, and I fell fainting to the abyss. It was that of General Lazel. The French army had entered Toledo. The Inquisition was in the hands of its enemies. These are the assorted poems of Edgar Allan Poe. The first one we read is To Helen. Helen, thy beauty is to me like the Nician's bark of yore, Thy gently o'er a perfumed sea, thy weary way-worn wandered bore to his native shore. On desperate seas long wont to roam, the Hyrcanth hair, the classic face, thy naiad airs have brought me home to the glory that was Greece, and the grandeur that was Rome. Lo, in yon brilliant windowed niche, how statue-like I see thee stand, the agate lamp within thy hand. Ah, Psyche, from the regions which are Holy Land. The city in the sea. Lo, Death has reared himself a throne, in a strange city lying alone, far down within the dim west, where the good and the bad and the worst and the best have gone to their eternal peace. There shines the palace and the tower, time-eaten towers, and trembled not, resembled nothing that is ours, around by lifting the wind forgot. Resignedly beneath the sky, the melancholy waters lie. No rays from the holy heaven come down into the long night of that town, but the light from out of the lurid sea streams up the torrents silently, gleams at the pinnacle far and free, of domes and spire, of kingly halls, of fanes up Babylon-like walls, of shadows long forgotten bowers, of sculptured ivy and stone towers, of many and marvelous shrines who reached frenzies intertwines, the viol and the violet and the vine. Resignedly beneath the sky, the melancholy waters lie, so blend the torrents and the shadows there, that all seem pendulous in the air, while from the proud tower in the town, death looks gigantically down. There open fanes and graping vines, yet lawn level with luminous waves, but not the riches there that lie in each idol's diamond's eye. Not the gaily jeweled dead tinted the water from their bed, for no ripple and curl, alas, along the wilderness of glass. No swelling to tell the windy ways, maybe upon some far happier sea. No heaving hint that winds have been on seas less hideous serene. But lo, astir in the air, the wave, there is movement there, as the tower hath thrust aside, is shrinking the dull tide, as their tops have been feebly given the void within the firm heavens. The wave now a redder glow, the hours are breathing faint and low, and then amid the earth moans, down, down that tower shall settle hence. Hell rising from 1,000 thrones shall do its reverence. Lenore. Ah, broken is the golden bowl, the spirit flown forever, let the bell toll. A saintly soul glides down the Stygian river, and let the burial rites be read, the funeral songs be sung, the dirge for the most lovely dead that ever died so young. And Guy de Vere, hast thou no tear? Weep now or nevermore. See on yon dear a rigid briar lie low, thy love, Lenore. Yon hair whose cheek a pallid hue, with tears are now streaming wet, see only through their codicil dew. A vacant coronet, false friend, you loved her for her wealth, and hated her for her pride. And when she fell in feeble health, ye blessed her, and then she died. How shall the ritual then be read, the requiem how be sung, for her most wronged of all the dead that ever die so young? Peccavimus, but rave not thus, and let the solemn song go up to God so mournfully that she may feel no wrong. The sweet Lenore hath gone before, with young Hope at her side, and thou art wild for the dear child. For that should have been thy bride, for her the fair, the the debonair, and now so lowly lies, the life still there, upon her hair, the death upon her eyes. Avaunt, tonight my heart is light. No dirge will I upraise, but waft the angels on their flight. With paean of all days let no bell toll, lest her sweet soul, amidst the hallowed mirth, should catch the note of the doth float. Up from the damned earth to friend above, from fiends below, the indignant ghost is riven, from grief and moan to a gold throne beside the King of Heaven. Thank you.